The president announced a new 50% tariff.
And over time, we become too dependent on the United States as our biggest customer, with more than 90% of our steel exports going south of the border.
They use tariffs to take our businesses, not only steel, other businesses too.
We must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects.
What if the heart of North America's manufacturing future is quietly shifting northward? While U.S. factories face rising tariffs and uncertainty, Canada is stepping into the spotlight with booming investments and new industries. Is this just a temporary shift or a profound reshaping of the continent's industrial landscape?
With President Trump taking direct aim at our economy, his goal is to take every single business out of our country, out of our province, and bring it down to the U.S. But I'll tell you, I will fight like I've never fought before, and we're going to continue fighting against President Trump and his radical views.
Over the past few years, the North American manufacturing landscape has been shifting in ways that many had not fully anticipated. The introduction of the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, brought with it a series of changes designed to promote local production and strengthen the region's industrial base. Among the countries involved, Canada appears to have implemented these new rules quite strategically.
Of days. Dominic LeBlanc says he remains confident that negotiations to reach that trade deal will continue. But this comes after the U.S. imposed a 35% tariff on Canadian goods not covered under CUSMA.
Dominic LeBlanc also says the Prime Minister and President will likely speak over the next number of days.
Today, roughly 80% of the parts used by Ford Motor Company and its vehicles are produced somewhere within North America. This level of regional content is significant, as it allows the company to avoid many tariffs and trade barriers that could otherwise affect its bottom line. Ford's approach also serves as a kind of protection against the uncertainty that has grown around manufacturing operations in the United States in recent years. This strategy has not happened in isolation. Canada's federal government, along with provincial administrations in Ontario and Quebec, have offered support packages aimed not just at attracting new manufacturing projects, but also at helping existing ones thrive over the long term. These packages include a variety of incentives, funding, and infrastructure support that create an environment where companies like Ford can feel confident making investments. On the other hand, key manufacturing states in the United States, such as Michigan and Ohio, are starting to feel the effects of this shift. Many auxiliary plants, those responsible for supplying parts or assembling subcomponents, have reported strain as orders move north into Canada. While this pattern of shifting production is not entirely new, the tariff policies introduced in 2025 seem to have made these changes more visible and impactful. Canada is no longer just a place where engines are assembled or vehicles are put together. Increasingly, it is becoming a center for advanced manufacturing sectors, including battery materials, electrification technologies, and logistics that span across the continent. As firms continue to assess the risks of waiting for U.S. policy to stabilize, companies like Ford have already begun to act. Instead of holding off on decisions, they are gradually shifting production to Canada, a country perceived as more stable and less prone to sudden disruptions. For decades, Canada's role in North America's industrial supply chain was largely supportive. It served as a reliable transit point for raw materials and operated quietly as a subcontractor behind the scenes of the major manufacturing hubs in Detroit or Illinois. But since 2025, a combination of tariffs and geopolitical changes have quietly but surely altered this role. No longer simply a buffer zone, Canada is emerging as a strategic industrial hub. This is a place where companies don't just send work that overflows from the U.S., but build projects intended to last. The 2025 U.S. tariff policies, especially the import duties on steel and aluminum, may have been an unexpected jolt that forced many industrial giants to reconsider their entire supply chain strategies. Factories that were once built in Canada merely to support U.S. operations are now becoming key centers of activity in their own right. This shift is unlikely to be a coincidence. When markets become uncertain, stability grows in value. Many voices in the industry are now saying that Canada is no longer the place that waits for overflow from the South. It is becoming the foundation for important projects, especially in sectors like electric vehicles, advanced materials, and high-performance combustion engines. Take Quebec, for example. A cathode materials plant has been announced as a collaboration between Ford, EcoProb, and SCON, with an investment of roughly $1.2 billion. While the annual production volume of 45,000 tons might sound technical, it represents much more than numbers. Behind this investment lie over 345 skilled jobs and a clear message. Canada is no longer just a waypoint for raw materials, but is stepping into a leading role in the new energy era. Similarly, in Windsor, Ontario, a city that has seen its share of layoffs in recent years, Ford has committed approximately 600 million Canadian dollars to upgrade its engine plant. What is notable here is the collaboration among three parties: Ford, the federal government, and the province of Ontario, each contributing 102 million Canadian dollars. This kind of shared commitment signals a shift in mindset. Rather than waiting for the market to resolve challenges on its own, there is an active effort to preserve domestic production capacity. Signs of renewed activity are visible across various Canadian manufacturing sites. Cranes are back in yards that had been quiet for years. Machinery hums again in places like Oakville and Quebec. Engineers who left the industry during the pandemic are returning to the factory floor, putting on their blue coats once more. As one mechanical engineer from Oakville shared, "I never thought I'd wear this jacket again, but for the first time since the pandemic, I feel hopeful." This resurgence is not just about jobs returning. Trade schools are seeing increased enrollment, logistics companies are securing new contracts, and local businesses near factories are reopening their night shifts. The impact goes beyond GDP figures. It is reviving an industrial rhythm that once defined a generation. Proximity to the U.S. market helps, but what sets Canada apart now is the relative policy stability it offers. While larger economies like the U.S. cycle through temporary tariffs and fluctuating trade barriers, Canada maintains a steadier course. Being part of the USMCA, combined with high local content requirements, allows companies like Ford to operate in Canada while still meeting rules to avoid costly export tariffs. Investment incentives at both federal and provincial levels also play a critical role. These factors combined make Canada an attractive place to invest and produce, raising the question, if Canada is rising as a manufacturing hub, how long can it maintain this role? If the multi-billion-dollar projects currently underway proceed smoothly, and the region proves itself efficient and dependable, then what is being built today could be more than just a series of short-term contracts. It might become the foundation of a sustainable, independent, and distinctly Canadian manufacturing future. While Canada is steadily emerging as a key player in North America's industrial landscape, the story across the border in the United States is more complex and, in many ways, concerning. The tariffs introduced by the U.S. government in 2025 on steel and aluminum imports from Canada and other countries were intended to protect domestic producers and safeguard American jobs. However, the results have been mixed and, for some sectors, quite challenging. These tariffs, which reached as high as 25% and later increased to 50% in some cases, significantly raised the cost of steel and aluminum for American manufacturers. On paper, this kind of protectionist policy aims to encourage domestic production by making imported materials more expensive and therefore less competitive. But in practice, the American steel industry has struggled to expand capacity quickly enough to meet rising demand. This has led to a market imbalance. Steel prices surged to historic highs, while domestic production remained limited. For industries heavily reliant on steel, such as automotive manufacturing, construction, and precision engineering, the shortage of key materials became a serious issue. Some assembly plants even reported temporary shutdowns due to a lack of cold-rolled steel, a vital input that was previously sourced reliably from Canadian suppliers in Ontario and Quebec. Experts have pointed out that while the tariffs were introduced with defensive intentions to protect American steelworkers and plants, the policy lacked accompanying measures to boost domestic metallurgical capacity. In other words, the tariffs made imported steel more expensive, but the U.S. was not ready to meet that demand internally at the same scale. This gap between supply and demand has created significant challenges for manufacturers, many of whom are now questioning the overall effectiveness of the tariffs. The human impact of these policies is evident in the industrial heartland of America. States such as Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, once vibrant centers of manufacturing and steel production, have seen a quieter atmosphere in recent times. Workers who were once accustomed to 3-shift schedules, operating round the clock, are now facing reduced hours or even temporary layoffs. One veteran steelworker in Pittsburgh summed up the frustration felt by many. "I support protective measures if they help keep my plant alive, but if we're still shutting down, who exactly is being protected?" This sentiment is shared by thousands of workers who feel caught in a difficult position, officially protected by tariffs, yet still experiencing job losses and factory closures. Meanwhile, just across the border in Canada, the picture looks very different. Ontario and Quebec are experiencing a wave of investment and hiring that many say hasn't been seen since the post-pandemic recovery. New factories are opening, existing plants are expanding, and there is a growing demand for skilled workers. Canadian workers seem to be stepping into roles that U.S. workers are forced to leave behind due to the challenging economic conditions. This shift is creating a geographic redistribution of industrial activity. Once proud manufacturing towns in the U.S., such as Erie in Pennsylvania, Youngstown in Ohio, and Gary in Indiana, are now facing scenes reminiscent of past industrial declines. Production lines sit idle, parking lots around factories remain empty, and local businesses near these plants are shutting early or closing entirely due to reduced foot traffic. The disruption in this case is driven not by international competition, but by domestic policy decisions and their ripple effects. The strain is not limited to large manufacturers. Small and mid-sized suppliers are also bearing the brunt of rising steel prices. For example, a steel frame workshop in Indiana recently laid off 18 employees, most of whom were skilled workers over the age of 45. The company lost a contract with a major Texas-based construction firm because input costs had increased by 32% in just 3 months. The quality of their products remained unchanged, but the sudden price rise made their bids uncompetitive. Some small manufacturers have considered importing steel from Asia, where prices are generally lower. However, this option comes with its own challenges. Importing from overseas introduces concerns over logistics delays, certification processes, and quality assurance. These factors complicate supply chains and can increase overall risk and costs, making it a less attractive alternative to reliable local sourcing. The situation raises a difficult question. Are protectionist tariffs still serving their intended purpose if the very factories they are supposed to defend cannot remain open without significant reinvestment in domestic production capacity? The current policies may be causing more disruption than long-term solutions. For many workers, the disappointment runs deeper than job losses. It is the feeling of being left behind while the rest of the world advances that weighs heavily. Communities that once thrived on steel production and manufacturing are now struggling to find new footing. The question that remains is whether protecting the steel industry through tariffs still holds meaning when those who once labored on the factory floors see their futures drifting northward. Ford, one of the most prominent automotive manufacturers in North America, provides a clear example of how companies are responding to these shifts. Rather than facing steep import duties by shipping products directly into the United States, Ford has used bond carriers, special transporters with customs guarantees, to move vehicles from Mexico to Canada through U.S. territory without incurring tariffs. This logistical workaround reportedly allowed Ford to avoid nearly $1 billion in tariffs in 2025 alone. This adaptation not only highlights the flexibility and sophistication of global corporations, but also raises important questions about the real-world effectiveness of these tariff policies. If the goal was to protect American industry, yet the outcome includes corporate shifts, lost tariff revenues, and disrupted supply chains, then what exactly is being safeguarded? Under this evolving model, Many manufacturing activities have become trans-American flows. Goods move through the U.S. but do not remain there. Vehicles, parts, and steel materials are transported from Mexico to Canada, leaving behind quiet highways and silent rail yards in formerly bustling U.S. manufacturing regions. This change has serious implications for support sectors that were once the backbone of many communities in the American Midwest. Jobs in trucking, warehousing, and port management, roles that sustained hundreds of thousands of families, are disappearing as the volume of freight passing through these hubs declines. Former assembly centers in states like Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois are losing their industrial relevance. Meanwhile, regions in Ontario and Quebec are experiencing renewed activity and growth. Large corporations can navigate these complex trade and tariff environments with legal teams, tax strategies, and negotiation leverage. However, the workers, small business owners, and everyday consumers often have no choice but to bear the costs and disruptions. Rising steel prices have ripple effects beyond factories. They contribute to increased construction costs, which in turn push up the prices of homes, vehicles, and a wide range of consumer goods. Manufacturers in Pennsylvania and Michigan, who have long relied on Canadian steel and aluminum, are facing the difficult possibility of scaling back or shutting down operations altogether. Between June and July of 2025, global commodity markets saw sharp increases in the prices of iron ore, scrap steel, and hot-rolled coil. The wave of tariff measures between the U.S. and Canada appears to have shaken investor confidence in the region. The International Monetary Fund issued warnings that prolonged regional tensions could threaten the fragile global economic recovery still underway after the pandemic and recent energy crises. Perhaps most tellingly, the IMF highlighted the psychological impact of policy uncertainty. Often, the fear and hesitation caused by unclear or fluctuating trade policies can have a greater negative effect than the policies themselves. As a result, some international investors are staying on the sidelines of North American markets, not because there is no opportunity, but because the future has become too unpredictable. While the US and Canada remain locked in trade disputes, other countries like India and Brazil are seizing the moment to expand their global influence. India has significantly increased steel exports to developing regions in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, markets that were once strongholds for North American suppliers. Brazil, home to some of the world's richest iron ore reserves, is moving quickly to sign free trade agreements with Europe and Southeast Asia. This expansion could allow Brazil to capture contracts and markets traditionally dominated by American and Canadian companies. The question now is whether these trends will continue. If supply chain fractures are not repaired soon, could North America's industrial backbone be quietly and permanently replaced? For many who have spent their lives in the steel and metalworking industries, the changes underway are not simply about tariffs or investment flows. They touch on deeper issues of trust, industrial identity, and values that some thought had faded long ago. As factories in Canada light up again and towns in parts of the U.S. fall silent, no one can say for certain what comes next. Is this a temporary adjustment or the start of a profound restructuring of North America's entire industrial supply chain? The answers remain unclear, but the stakes are undoubtedly high. As the industrial shifts unfold across North America, Canada's role in the region's manufacturing and supply chains is clearly changing. No longer merely a supporting player or a secondary location for overflow production, Canada is positioning itself as a key strategic hub with a growing focus on advanced sectors and long-term investments. This evolution is largely driven by a combination of stable policies, supportive government programs, and a clear strategy aligned with the new realities of trade under agreements like USMCA. Historically, Canada's manufacturing base often revolved around assembly and processing, typically serving as an extension of U.S. operations. The country was seen primarily as a transit point for raw materials or as a quieter site for engine assembly and vehicle production. However, the introduction of tariff policies in 2025 and the resulting uncertainty in U.S.-based manufacturing have made Canada's relative predictability and stable environment increasingly attractive to companies looking to secure their supply chains. One of the most notable shifts has been in the automotive industry, particularly in sectors connected to the emerging electric vehicle market. Canada is rapidly gaining recognition not just as a place for traditional vehicle assembly, but as a launchpad for next-generation industries. Battery materials, electrification technologies, and transcontinental logistics are becoming core elements of this new industrial identity. Take the example of Quebec, where a major project involving a cathode materials plant has recently been announced. This plant is the result of collaboration between Ford, EcoProb, and SCON, with an estimated investment of around $1.2 billion. While the technical production capacity of 45,000 tons annually might seem like a narrow figure to some, it represents much more than just output. This facility will create over 345 skilled jobs and send a clear message that Canada is stepping into the spotlight of the new energy era. The significance of such projects goes beyond employment numbers. They signal a shift in where and how advanced manufacturing is being done. Instead of being a secondary site or a backup option, Canada is actively shaping the future of industries that will define the coming decades. It's not just about producing parts or assembling vehicles anymore. It's about building and innovating in sectors like battery chemistry and electrification that are central to the global push for sustainability and clean energy. Similarly, Windsor, Ontario, a city that has experienced layoffs and uncertainty in recent years, is seeing renewed commitment. Ford has pledged approximately $600 million Canadian dollars to upgrade its engine plant there. What stands out is the collaboration behind this investment. The federal government, the province of Ontario, and Ford are each contributing $102 million Canadian dollars. This tripartite funding model signals a new way of thinking, one that doesn't simply wait for the market to sort things out, but actively works to maintain and enhance domestic production capacity. The impact of these investments can already be felt on the ground. Machinery is humming again in previously quiet plants in Oakville and Beckenor. Cranes and construction crews have returned to yards that had been dormant for years. For many workers, this marks a turning point. Mechanical engineers and factory employees who once left the industry are donning their work jackets again, finding renewed hope and purpose. David Leff, a mechanical engineer based in Oakville, expressed this sentiment simply: "I never thought I'd wear this jacket again, but for the first time since the pandemic, I feel hopeful." His words capture the mood of many in Canadian manufacturing towns, where trade schools are filling up with new students. Logistics firms are winning contracts, and cafes near factories are reopening night shifts to meet demand. This revival is more than just economic. It's a return to a certain rhythm of industrial life that once defined entire communities and generations. The stability Canada offers is crucial here. Unlike some larger economies that continue to cycle through temporary tariffs, fluctuating technical barriers, and uncertain trade policies, Canada is maintaining a steadier, more predictable pace. Being part of the USMCA and upholding strict local content requirements gives companies like Ford the confidence to produce within Canada while still meeting the rules of origin to avoid costly export tariffs. In addition to this, various investment incentives from federal to provincial governments play an essential role. These incentives help offset risks and encourage companies to plan for the long term rather than focusing on short-term cost savings. With these advantages, the key question may no longer be why companies choose Canada, but rather how long Canada can sustain this role. If multi-billion-dollar projects continue to roll out smoothly, and if the region proves efficient and dependable, the foundation being built could go far beyond temporary contracts or stopgap measures. It may become the basis for a sustainable, independent, and distinctly Canadian manufacturing future. Of course, this new industrial direction is not without challenges. The U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum, while intended to protect domestic industries, created disruptions in the supply chain that have had repercussions on both sides of the border. When tariffs are raised without a coordinated plan to expand domestic metallurgical capacity, markets can become imbalanced. Steel prices surged dramatically as a result. Yet U.S. production capabilities remained limited, putting pressure on industries reliant on steel, auto manufacturing, construction, and precision engineering, to name a few. Some assembly plants even reported halting production temporarily due to shortages of cold-rolled steel, which was previously sourced reliably from Ontario or Quebec. Many experts have argued that these tariff policies, although defensive in intention, did not come with sufficient measures to convert supply challenges into opportunities for revitalizing domestic capacity. This gap has been particularly felt by the workers who were supposed to benefit from these protections. Meanwhile, American manufacturing towns, especially in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, are facing quieter days. Workers who were used to full shifts now face reduced hours or contract suspensions. Steel workers and factory employees share a growing sense of disillusionment. The very industries and communities that these policies aim to protect now appear vulnerable and uncertain. At the same time, Canada's industrial zones are buzzing with activity and investment. Ontario and Quebec have become attractive destinations for capital and production moving away from more uncertain U.S. environments. This has created new jobs and economic growth, but also raises broader questions about the future of North America's industrial geography. Long-standing American manufacturing centers like Erie, Youngstown, and Gary are revisiting scenes many had hoped were part of the past. Idle production lines, empty factory parking lots, and shuttered shops. The difference now is that this shift is less about global competition and more about the ripple effects of domestic policy decisions. The effects are felt beyond the factories themselves. Small and mid-sized suppliers, critical parts of the supply chain, are grappling with volatile steel prices and increased costs. In Indiana, for instance, a steel frame workshop recently laid off 18 skilled workers after losing a contract due to input costs rising by over 30% within a few months. For many small manufacturers, turning to Asian imports for cheaper steel is an option, but one fraught with logistics, certification, and quality risks. The broader picture suggests that protectionist tariffs, without significant reinvestment and capacity building, may do more to disrupt than to create lasting industrial strength. For workers who have dedicated their careers to the steel and metal industries, the shifts feel like a loss of trust and industrial identity. The nostalgia for an era of steady manufacturing jobs is mixed with anxiety over a future that seems to be moving elsewhere. As Canada's factories come alive again, and American towns face quiet streets, the future of North American manufacturing remains uncertain. Is Canada's rise a sign of a deeper, lasting transformation in the region's industrial supply chain? Or is the United States quietly losing a part of its industrial soul that cannot be easily regained? While it is too early to say definitively, one thing is clear: the stakes are high. The decisions made today by governments and corporations will shape the region's economic landscape for decades. Whether this will lead to a more resilient, innovative, and balanced North American industrial ecosystem, or deepen divides and economic displacement, remains to be seen. The trade tensions between the United States and Canada, particularly following the tariffs imposed in 2025, have deeply affected the industrial landscape across North America. What was intended as a measure to protect domestic steel and aluminum producers in the U.S. has instead triggered a series of complex consequences that have rippled through supply chains, manufacturing hubs, and communities. One of the most significant outcomes has been the strategic responses by major corporations seeking to avoid or minimize the impact of these tariffs. Ford, for example, has emerged as a clear example of how companies are adapting quickly and effectively. Rather than directly confronting the tariffs and absorbing the associated costs, Ford turned to logistical and customs strategies that allowed it to circumvent some of the most punitive import duties. Ford's approach involves using bond carriers, specialized transporters who operate with customs guarantees, enabling vehicles to move from Mexico through U.S. territory to Canada without incurring U.S. tariffs. This method leverages the geographic and trade provisions under the USMCA, creating a sort of soft escape route that preserves Ford's ability to operate competitively without facing the steep costs associated with direct import tariffs. The scale of this tariff avoidance is substantial. By some estimates, Ford was able to avoid nearly $1 billion in tariffs in 2025 alone. This figure has drawn attention not only for its financial significance, but also because it highlights the limitations and unintended effects of tariff policies. The original goal of protecting American industry seems, at least in part, to have been undermined by corporate adaptation. This scenario raises important questions about the real-world effectiveness of such trade policies. If large corporations can navigate around tariffs through legal and logistical workarounds, what does that mean for the intended beneficiaries? Are the tariffs truly protecting American jobs and industries, or are they inadvertently encouraging companies to shift production and investment to more stable environments like Canada? The answer appears to be leaning toward the latter. Instead of fostering growth within U.S. manufacturing hubs, these tariffs seem to have encouraged a gradual shift in production and investment toward Canadian facilities. The effect is twofold. U.S. plants and supply chains face disruption, while Canadian operations receive fresh capital and job creation. This shift is particularly visible in the logistics and transportation sectors. As vehicles, parts, and steel materials increasingly pass through the U.S. only as transit points rather than destinations, support sectors like truck driving, warehouse management, and port operations are feeling the strain. These sectors have historically been central to the economies of many Midwestern American communities, providing stable employment to hundreds of thousands of families. With this changing flow of goods, some of these jobs are disappearing. Former industrial hubs in states like Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois are seeing their relevance decline. The bustling activity that once characterized their factories and shipping yards has quietened, replaced by empty parking lots and idle machinery. Meanwhile, Canadian centers, particularly in Ontario and Quebec, are experiencing renewed vitality. This transformation illustrates the complex nature of trade and industrial policy. While tariffs are often introduced to shield domestic industries, their ripple effects can undermine entire ecosystems of support jobs and related businesses. The loss of logistics roles, for example, affects not just workers, but also local economies dependent on their spending power. For ordinary workers and small factory owners, the rapid shifts create uncertainty and hardship. Many have no control over the legal strategies used by multinational corporations to navigate trade barriers, nor can they easily relocate their businesses or skills. Rising steel prices, triggered by tariffs and limited U.S. domestic production capacity, have also contributed to cost pressures that force difficult decisions. Small and mid-sized suppliers have been especially vulnerable. In places like Indiana, some workshops have laid off experienced workers after losing contracts due to escalating material costs. Although the quality of their steel products has not changed, price increases, sometimes over 30% within a few months, have made their offerings uncompetitive. To stay afloat, some have considered sourcing steel from Asia, where prices tend to be lower. However, this introduces new challenges, including potential delays, certification complexities, and quality control risks. These challenges highlight a critical tension in protectionist policies. Tariffs may be intended to protect domestic industries, but without corresponding investment in expanding production capacity, they can cause price shocks and supply shortages. The result is often the very factory closures and job losses the policies seek to prevent. Furthermore, the policy uncertainty created by ongoing trade disputes has had a chilling effect on investor confidence. In the months following the tariff announcements, global commodity markets for iron ore, scrap steel, and hot-rolled coil experienced sharp price increases. This volatility, combined with fears of escalating trade conflicts, has made some international investors hesitant to commit capital to North American projects. The International Monetary Fund has weighed in on the situation, warning that prolonged regional trade tensions could hamper the fragile global economic recovery still underway after the pandemic and recent energy crises. Their assessment emphasizes that the psychological impact of policy uncertainty, where companies and investors hesitate due to unclear future conditions, can be more damaging than the policies themselves. While the U.S. and Canada remain locked in trade disputes, other countries are moving quickly to seize new opportunities. India, for instance, has significantly increased steel exports to developing markets in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. These regions were once strongholds for North American suppliers, but are now opening up to new competitors. Brazil, too, is leveraging its rich iron ore reserves to expand its global footprint. It has accelerated efforts to sign free trade agreements with European and Southeast Asian countries, positioning itself to win contracts previously dominated by US and Canadian firms. This shifting global landscape adds further pressure on North American industries to adapt and innovate. If supply chain fractures are not addressed soon, there is a real risk that the industrial backbone of North America could be quietly and permanently replaced by emerging global players. For many workers who have dedicated their careers to steel mills and factories, these changes are deeply personal. The loss of jobs is more than just an economic statistic. It represents a loss of identity, trust, and community. As plants shutter or reduce operations, entire towns face uncertain futures, and generations of industrial heritage risk fading away. Canada's industrial resurgence, fueled by investment in advanced sectors and policy stability, contrasts sharply with these trends. Its ability to attract capital, secure skilled labor, and maintain stable trade conditions is becoming a key competitive advantage. This resurgence is reshaping the North American supply chain, shifting the center of gravity northward. Whether this transformation leads to a more balanced and resilient North American industrial base or deepens economic divides remains to be seen. Policymakers, companies, and communities will all have roles to play in determining the future direction. The coming years will be crucial. If Canada continues to attract investment and develop new technologies, it could become a cornerstone of North America's manufacturing future, especially in areas like electric vehicles, battery materials, and advanced manufacturing. Conversely, the United States will need to carefully evaluate its trade and industrial policies to ensure they foster domestic capacity without creating unintended consequences. Supporting workers and communities affected by these transitions will be equally important to maintaining social and economic cohesion. In this complex environment, it is clear that trade policies alone cannot solve the challenges facing North American manufacturing. A broader, coordinated approach involving investments in capacity, workforce development, innovation, and stable regulatory frameworks will be essential. The story unfolding across the US-Canada border is a reminder that economic strategies must be adaptive, inclusive, and forward-looking. While tariffs may provide short-term protection, long-term success depends on creating environments where industries can grow sustainably and workers can thrive. As North America navigates this period of change, the experiences of companies like Ford and regions like Ontario and Quebec offer valuable lessons. Strategic foresight, collaboration between governments and industry, and a willingness to innovate are critical components in shaping a competitive and resilient manufacturing future. Ultimately, the question remains: can North America, with its complex and interwoven economies, find a way to balance protection, growth, and stability? The answer will shape the livelihoods of millions and the economic health of the continent for decades to come.